again. I really appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit of what I've learned in this really awesome spiritual tradition. And I want to talk about something that's very dear to me, which is happiness, because I've been studying this for the last long time. Happiness, I'm sure, is something that we all want to achieve. Is that gonna get it? Like, woo!
Happiness.
Happiness. We want to be happy, right? That's the big question. Now, we don't only just want to be happy, like for a split second, but we want to be happy if we could all the time, right? And so I was even wondering, is it only us that wants to be happy, or are they? Like, what about animals? Do they want to be happy? And does your dog want to be happy? Yeah, right. What about plants? Do plants want to be happy? Yeah. Probably, yeah, right? So really, happiness is a universal principle. And so being an academic, I try to grapple this question of, how to achieve long-lasting happiness from a little bit of a, thought, kind of mind-heavy standpoint. And so I wondered, okay, so how do we generally approach the way of how we achieve happiness? Well, we first have to ask the question of, how do we generally make decisions in life? What would you say are the two things that generally help you to make decisions in life? Intuition, okay, maybe also related to like it feels good kind of thing, right? Okay, what else?
Emotion.
Okay, emotion, yes, emotion, it feels good.
If it won't cause pain to myself or others.
Okay, yes. Mm-hmm.
Willingness and capabilities.
Okay, yes.
Information.
Information, knowledge, yeah. So all of what you said is absolutely correct. I'm trying to categorize it to make it a little bit easier to deal with, right? And so one is kind of the emotional state, and the other one is the logic, right? Reasoning. So 3 simple questions. I hope you all had lunch today. How did you make a decision of what you ate? Based on what?
What I like.
What you like, what feels good, what tastes good, right? What tastes your tongue. If you are, like my husband and I, on an Ayurvedic cleanse, you're not going for what tastes well. You're going for reasonably what you should put in your body, if it tastes good right now or not. So there can be a logical decision in terms of what you put in your body, what you eat as well, right? What about what you wear today? How did you make that decision?
It was hot.
It was hot, meaning you were logically thinking, it is summer outside, I probably should not wear my ski jacket right now. That's by using your intellect to make a decision of what you wear. What's another way of how you make your decision of what to wear today?
Where you're going.
Where are you going? Okay. A little bit more?
Your mood.
Your mood? Okay.
It's one of the only pairs of pants I own.
Okay.
What others will think.
What others will think in terms of, right, what does it look like? So you're thinking about the sense of the sight, of what will look like good for others, maybe what is appropriate to wear when you go somewhere, or even what is pleasing to you, right? I mean, probably a lot of us, we wear things that maybe others don't like, and we don't really give anything, right? Like, I like it. Like, I like it. So again, we can make a decision based on emotion here, like, look, or more of a sensual kind of decision, right? What looks good, and then we can make a more intellectual decision based on it's warm, therefore I wear something to cool my body off. If you drove here today, maybe you'll listen to something on the radio or on your playlist. Again, this decision can be based on what feels good right now in the moment, or it can be based on, I really should listen to this TED Talk while I'm driving here, so you make an intellectual decision because you think like you should learn something, right? So again, we really, in broad brushstrokes, make decisions based on our intellect, our logic, reasoning, or based on what feels good. So the question is, of course, how far does that bring us? How reliable are our senses and our mind in that capacity? So we can go through a list, and as you may already think, well, I'm sure she has something critical to say about this. And I do, right? There's lots of studies that have shown that really trusting our senses and trusting our mind is really not a good idea. I have a really easy little experiment for you. It's coming from basic perception psychology. It was one of the first classes I took ever in college. And so I'm going to show you an image, okay, and you're going to tell me which line is longer. Or is there a difference?
You're gonna have to hold it up with the people in the back.
It's probably hard to see. For those people in the front, give me an answer.
The bottom one looks longer.
Bottom one looks longer, okay? So these are exactly two of the same lines. They're not different from each other, yet we think the bottom one looks longer, okay? Now this is using our perception of sight, our sense of sight, to make a decision. So if we would make a decision of which way are we going, that one or that one, we would choose this one even though it's really the same, okay? So that's just as simple, and I know I don't have a PowerPoint, so this is like, I didn't even have a white piece of paper, so this is an envelope from a bill I had to pay, okay? So I'm really creative. So this is related to just perception psychology in terms of how we really cannot rely so much on our senses. But another example is how we choose relationships, right? Maybe we have chosen relationships based on sight, based on what the person looks like, and kind of disregarded what the person has going on the inside. Or, right, not making assumptions here, but it could also go the other way around, and we kind of just focus on the inner, and really we don't care about the sight. So that might work too. But, right, it's like how do we rely on making a decision in that sense? Another example that my husband always talks about is he uses his mind in the evening to say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to wake up at 5. Right? He tells his mind that's what I'm going to do. Guess what happens the next morning at 5? He's not going to wake up, right? And so sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. But right, he used his mind, and he was thinking, okay, if I'm telling my mind I'm going to do this, I can rely on my mind to do the action. But really, he couldn't, he can't, and that's just one of the simple examples, right? I'm sure you can think of others of how it's really not so reliable to rely on our mind. I had some other really cool examples. Another one that it's called affective forecasting error is this idea that we think something that happens in the future is going to be so much more heavier emotionally impacting than it actually will be. So a lot of times this is why we stay in relationships that are not good for us, just because we think that if we leave the relationship it's going to be so horrible, I'd rather stay with what is. You can also do this not only necessarily in relationships, but you spend so much time putting effort in this apartment, so leaving it now would just be so much of a pain. But then it turns out when you leave it, it's actually not that hard. So we totally have this impact bias, how we think that something is just so much more heavy and will impact us so much more than it actually does. So I could go on and on, but I think you get the point that it's really hard, or it's really not a reliable thing for us to rely on our senses and on our mind to make decisions, particularly when it comes to also then happiness, or generally really decisions in life. And so I wanted to share with you a little bit of this book. This is the Bhagavad Gita. You may have seen it outside. It's on the book there. And in this book, there is the main character. His name is Krishna, and he talks a lot, he really drops a lot of wisdom knowledge. So that's kind of how you can describe it in like an easy, simple terms, okay? And so one of the images I wanted to share with you is basically describing, and I know, again, you can't really see this, but I'm going to show it anyways, so because the front row can show it, which they may cover this. So we're looking at a picture here where we see some horses. Horses are reined in, right, in a horse carriage by a driver, okay? That's kind of the image that I want you to think about right now. And so in this book, Krishna describes how the senses, which are the horses, right, and so we have the 5 senses, right, hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, everything, touching, there we go. These senses are really the motivating force of what drives us in life. Right, so again, you chose either based on your senses or your mind, what you were eating today, what you were wearing today, maybe even how you interacted with the person today, right? Maybe that person smelled funny. You ever had, it's like one of those things. We make quick decisions. It's not even a conscious thing. It's just that how our mind operates. And so the senses, the horses, are reined in by the reins, right? So it's really, you can think about when you walk down the street and it smells like fresh waffles. You know that smell, like fresh waffles? It's so hard to pass by, right? Because what happens, you smell it and then your mind is like, ooh, I want that now. So what then makes you either go for it or not?
Whether you're hungry.
Okay, yes. What's the, I'm looking for, we have the senses, we have the mind. What's another entity that helps you make that decision? Intelligence, right? The intelligence comes in and says, well, it's 6 o'clock, you are about to go have dinner with your friend at 7, probably not the best idea to have a giant cookie and ice cream right now, right? Maybe your mind also tells you that's a super great idea, you just go right to dessert and skip the rest, right? Sure, these are all decisions that could be made, but that's your intellect that comes into play. So the intellect in this, again, image, and again, I encourage you to obviously check it out outside, right? This image is kind of in the center of the book. There is a person that's reining in the horses. So the person that's reining in the horses is our intelligence, okay? So our intelligence is trying to control and rein in the mind, right? So mind is telling you, don't eat the cookie, or eat the cookie, and the intelligence is like, no, don't eat the cookie. And then again, however, there's the smell, so the mind again, eat the cookie. No, don't eat the cookie. Smell comes again, tells the mind, eat the cookie. No, don't eat it. It's like it's endless loop. And you obviously can do that with whatever it might be. That's our constant story of life, right? The senses are going somewhere. They're always distracted. It smells good, looks good. Oh, that sounds interesting. Let me go here. And then the mind is saying, yes, let's do all this. And then the intelligence tries to rein it in. Be like, no. This is not a good decision. Yeah, that's maybe a better decision. Let's do this, let's not do this. Which, however, then, means that the intelligence needs to know what is a good decision and what's not a good decision. Right? The intelligence needs to know, okay, we're going to rein those horses and have the horses go to the right and get a little bit of this, or have the horses go to the left and get a little bit of that. And so knowledge, therefore, is really important, but it's incomplete when the intelligence doesn't really know what the actual highest knowledge is. And so when we only rely our happiness and trying to find our happiness based on our senses, we always are going to cut ourselves short. Because whatever is sensual also is always temporary, right? And you can think about this in simple terms of, obviously, when you eat that ice cream. I talk a lot about cookies. I really hope they have good dessert today. I'm sure they do. And when you think about eating that, you have that ice cream in front of you. And so the first scoop, obviously, is what's going to taste just the best, right? But then the second scoop is still good, but it's just not as good as the first. And then when you get to empty the whole bucket, it's just more of a, yay, hashtag finish the whole ice cream jar in like 10 seconds or something, right? But really, is the last bite of that ice cream the same as the first one? No, it's not. Because it's, again, a law of nature that we adapt to the things we engage in on a sensual basis. And so same thing with, if you listen to a song from Miley Cyrus, I don't know, first time, right? And you're like, yay, I'm like so out of the loop with all that stuff. We need JC here to do some little singing. But right, let's just think about it. You listen to a song and you're like, this is awesome. And then it comes on the radio over and over again when you drive to Mantra House. And so after you've listened to it the 50th time, you're like, okay, I'm over it. Like, it's too much. Can't handle it. Let's get something new. And that's just how it goes in life in general. And then again, we can apply this in the bigger realm. we apply it to how we build relationships. So let's think about how do we find commonality in relationships? Maybe in a relationship you value how both of you really like to eat good food, or like good music, or like to travel. And you base your happiness within your relationship into that. Then what happens when suddenly you, let's say, can't actually taste something anymore? That actually happened to my mom, and she was miserable, right? I'm sure all of us can actually think about that. Or let's think about, you lose hearing. Okay, well, you might say, okay, I'm going to be one of those fortunate ones. It's not going to happen to me. Also, cognitive bias, FYI, called third person effect. Right? So it doesn't even have to be something heavy like that. But what about you traveling? Something that really, connects you together as in a relationship. And then you just don't have the money to travel. What then? What do you base your relationship on that? Let's not even say maybe you are the richest person in the world, but then you don't have time, because in order to be rich, you need to be working all the time, so you don't have time to actually travel, right? So if you base your happiness within your relationship on those sense-pleasing activities, you're really doomed to cut yourself short within your happiness, because it will always be based on something that is impermanent. And so, however, there is a solution. I'm not leaving you with, this is horrible. There's obviously a solution. And so the solution is the third entity, which is based on, again, this image that you can't see, but I highly encourage you to check it out. Again, we have horses. They are reined in by reins, right? The horses are the senses. Reins are the mind. The person that's steering the mind is the intelligence. And then there's something else actually sitting in the horse carriage. The carriage is the body, okay? There's something else sitting in there, and that is our consciousness. As you can see, the consciousness is the only thing that is not attached to either the intelligence, the driver, the mind, the reins, or the horses, the senses. It's actually just sitting there. It's sitting there, and we go through our life, right, smelling and tasting and feeling, and it's just like on the right, like going up and down, right, going through the motions, because the intelligence is sitting there and thinks that, ooh, I need to go for that, because that's going to make me happy. I should follow my sense of sight, and I should totally just go for this person, because he or she looks super pretty. And then we're going that way, and the consciousness is just sitting there, oh, great, now we're going to the left, but yesterday I was to the right. And so it's kind of like car sick, it's hanging out in the carriage, and just going up and down and right and left, and it's like, oh, just getting all that stuff. But actually, the consciousness itself has an innate desire too. What do you think the desire is? Peace. Happiness. Yeah. Yes. Knowledge, love, all those things. So actually, desire of the consciousness is also to be ultimately happy. And so then we have to ask ourselves, what is that ultimate happiness? And that is something that is written in the yoga text, as well as has been confirmed a gazillion times by science, as in positive psychology. What is the essence? What is that thing that makes us the most happy? What do you think?
Purpose.
Having a purpose, certainly very important. Even more.
To love and be loved.
Exactly, right? Having love, being connected. We have so many studies that have shown if a person or a being, even an animal, even plants, if they are not engaging in some form of love, connection, relationship, that they feel connected to something, they're dying, they're getting super intense psychological, mental illnesses, they have tons of issues, they're not happy or healthy or living in any way a human life. And so connection and love is really what is the ultimate underlying mechanism of what brings us happiness. And again, that has been shown in science, but in the spiritual text here, it talks a little bit more of where that comes from. And when you think about connection and love, can that exist by itself? No. There's always something that needs to be loved. There needs to be an exchange. Even when you say, I love myself, even then, you are having a relationship, so it's like me loving myself. So you're going like in a circle, right? So it's like, I love myself, right? So even there is an interaction. It's a back and forth going on. And so that consciousness that sits in this carriage, the only thing and the only desire that it has is actually reconnect with the source of all consciousness. And that's where it wants the horse carriage to go. So now you might think, well, why then, if that's the purpose, right, if that's the highest, why do we then even have senses? Why do we have a mind? Why do we have an intelligence? Well, there is also a reason for that, and actually I wanted to read you a verse from this text here, the Bhagavad Gita, and it's in chapter 2, and it says, though the embodied consciousness may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains. So we always have this taste for sense enjoyment, but seizing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness. So what is that highest taste now? Right? And that highest taste is simply that we are using the senses to engage our consciousness with the source of consciousness. And what that looks like can be in various things. I'm going to give you a couple that goes through the senses and the mind and the intelligence. Okay? One is obviously what we do here. We are engaging our sense of hearing by hearing these transcendental sounds of this mantra. And when you sit here and you just drop down, you just let all that stuff that's going in your mind just go, and you really feel the vibration. You feel like your heart opening. You feel like this, I just want to hug the world. That's what we're going for. That is what those transcendental vibrations are getting at. They're getting right to that consciousness that's sitting in that horse carriage. And it's like, yes, you're engaging the sense of hearing for the higher pleasure, for that higher taste. Same thing with food, right? We're usually engaging again in tasting food as, ooh, this is pleasing my tongue. How about knowing that we have, or we are this highest consciousness? We first offer this food with form of a gratitude that we can even engage in it first before we eat it. So it can be just something simple, like before you cook your meal, you're like, and just, shove it in. You're like, take just a breath. You're like, thank you. This is awesome. I get to enjoy this meal. And then you eat it. Then, using your sense of taste for really reconnecting that consciousness that's in that art, that is you, with the source of all consciousness. Right? Same thing with seeing. Right? You can walk around the world and see in every being that there is something higher, that there's this higher consciousness in them. You can look at nature and be like, whoa, wild, this is amazing, right? And give it back and think about, wow, I'm just so appreciative. You're just giving gratitude. Because when you have gratitude, you're giving something away from yourself. It's not directed toward yourself. And then you can engage your mind by having an individual meditation practice where you're chanting these these transcendental mantras for yourself, and you engage your mind, and then your mind is not going senses here and there. Your mind actually then is focused on those vibrations. And then same thing with the intellect, right? Your intelligence. You need to actually give the intelligence the actual truth, so it knows where it can steer the senses to. And that comes from reading those texts, right? Engaging in really understanding and learning what is that source of the highest consciousness. What is consciousness itself? And when you do that, you're actually then engaging your senses, your mind, your intelligence in a way that can bring you everlasting happiness.
Oh.